Hi, this is Scott with the Android Guys podcast. I'm sitting here with Luke.
Hey, everybody.
What's going on, Luke?
Not much.
Want to talk about old versions of Android?
Let's do it.
Let's go back to 2011.
Okay.
So roughly 10 years from today.
Sure.
It's a long time ago.
It was.
If you've been with Android, followed it, you've seen and felt lots of changes along the way.
Yeah.
This particular version of Android, 4.0 ice cream sandwich,
Yes.
really, I think for the first time, starts to make it feel like it has a direction
Yeah.
for phones and tablets, and starts to feel like it has some true intent behind it.
Right.
It doesn't feel like we're just kind of making things up as we go. We've polished this. We've added some features in, but we've made the UI in a way that it looks unique.
Right.
Doesn't look like a half-baked version of what Apple was doing.
Right.
And feels different enough that you can say, oh, this actually isn't the same version of Android at all that I spent time with, a couple of years ago. So we're looking at around 3 years now after the first release of Android. So a lot of changes along the way. This 4.0 drops October 18th, 2011. Luke, what was going on? This is something that we do for each episode, is to kind of take us back in time, get us in the headspace of what life was like.
Sure.
What we were doing for entertainment purposes.
Yep.
What we might have been watching on TV or seen at the theater.
Right.
Let's start with radio. Put me wise. What would I hear if I'm driving to and from work?
Yeah, so listening to the radio, you're going to hear Someone Like You by Adele. Top song of that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it wasn't that one, though, it was Moves Like Jagger.
10 years?
Yeah, Maroon 5 featuring Christina Aguilera.
Man.
Yeah.
I remember these because my son was, at that time, he would have been 7, 8-ish. And he was at that age where he was singing what he was hearing.
Right.
And I remember him singing Moves Like Jagger.
Right. And then the last one is Pumped Up Kicks by Foster the People.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's the headspace of radio. So that's what you're listening to on the way home from work. You get home, though, you pop on the TV. There's 3 different sort of feelings that you could, genres you could tap into for your TV watching. The first one was the return of a face that we hadn't seen for a couple years. It was the debut of Last Man Standing. That's the Tim Allen show where he was not Tim the Toolman Taylor anymore. He was Tim the I think it's like an outdoor like kind of Patagonia-esque kind of situation.
That's one that I never really watched. My wife kind of picked it up recently on syndication, and we didn't realize. We were trying to figure out when some of these episodes took place.
Right.
Because there is some kind of feels like some social commentary or some kind of things happening of the time.
Right.
And that makes sense that it would have been 2011.
Right. And then if you wanted a little bit more serious, it was the debut of Homeland.
Whoa.
Yeah. So this is October 2011. Homeland, if you're not familiar, is about Claire Danes is a CIA or FBI. I don't remember exactly which, investigating an officer that they think is a sleeper spy.
Wow. I remember this when it came out because it was kind of like you'd spent so much time looking at HBO as the premier place to go for more adult-themed weekly shows. And this kind of put Showtime on the radar of like, hey, we've got some pretty cool stuff too.
Right.
I've yet to watch an episode, and I wanted to wait till it was over, and here we are now. I know that it's,
Yeah.
I've got a lot to catch up on. So if you have watched it, don't spill anything.
I won't. It's worth a watch. I haven't finished the series, but I have watched a couple seasons. And then if the drama is not your thing, we get into the scariness on TV. Debut the first season of American Horror Story.
Oh wow!
Happened October of 2011. That was the first season. Was The Murder House.
Yep.
That I think that was one that caught everybody off guard. Just what is this show? This was a real story.
Yeah.
And now we how far we are removed from American Horror Story, and now we've seen things like American Crime Story come out.
Yep.
But it was the first time that we've seen that style of storytelling.
Kind of put Ryan Murphy on the map too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So the last thing we normally talk about is theatrical stuff. What would have happened?
At this time, there were some other movies that are more well known a little bit before this week and after this week, but this week was two remakes, and then another movie that I don't get enough. I don't think gets enough love from people. The first two remakes, the remake of The Thing.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, that was 2011, and the remake of Footloose.
Okay.
Yeah, so both of those came out the same week.
Wow.
Yep.
That's a long time ago.
And then the movie that is one of the ones that I thought was pretty decent, and I haven't thought about this movie in years, is The Big Year with Steve Martin and Jack Black and Owen Wilson. You remember that movie?
Yeah, I do. I do. And that's one that just kind of, I put it on a shelf somewhere and never even thought about dusting it off.
Yeah, it's not a movie that's like, an instant classic, one you're always going to revisit, but it's a little hidden gem if you haven't seen it.
Yep.
And that came out, October of 2011. So that's getting you in the headspace of kind of what the world looked like around you. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about, what happened with Ice Cream Sandwich and Android 4.0.
So it arrives in mid-October.
Right.
And it actually was postponed about a week or so because this had fallen right on the heels of Steve Jobs passing away.
Right.
And Google had something announced or planned, but they pushed it back a week to, have its own separate time to kind of, let that play out a little bit.
Sure.
The UI or user interface on this is referred to as Holo, and it builds on it marries 2.3 gingerbread features with some of the things we talked about in the last episode with Honeycomb.
Right.
Because aesthetically, it carries over a lot of that like blue Tron-like. We talked about like the holographic stuff, and that's where this is, that Holo UI. So this kind of marries the two paths. It kind of felt like, if you remember when we talked about the tablet episode and Honeycomb, that felt like they had been working on that separately. It felt like a right hand working on something while the left hand was working on phones. And it was nice to see them kind of merge the design language of Android.
Right.
Do you remember your first time seeing 4.0 and what it felt like to you?
I do. I remember going, oh, this feels like an actual OS.
Because you had gone away from Android for a while.
I did. I went to iPhone for a little bit, and I remember looking at it and going, oh, wow, like this feels like it's not a different experience for tablet and phone. It's this one unified look, and every phone, no matter what carrier or what device, they're all starting to look the same now.
Yeah. I really was fascinated by it. I remember kind of distinctly when it came out because it had looked so different for phones. And I remember more kind of marrying the look of that with the phone that we'll talk about here.
Right.
But I remember a lot of friends, people who had kind of casually followed Android and kind of seen things along the way. Maybe they hadn't even really purchased smartphones. But for them to actually look at it and go, hey, that actually looks pretty cool, and it's functional, you know,
right.
and that's where, you know, as a person who keeps their face kind of in the space, you see a lot of things that come out with Android, and then later kind of Apple would come out and talk about having it, whether it was introduced in that particular generation or not, but it was kind of like, it was frustrating because Android felt like it had so many capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
But here is where you start to kind of see those capabilities.
Right.
And it becomes a little bit less about hardware specifications and the arms race of, you know, let's get bigger, faster. Now,
right.
we will continue to see that over the next few years.
Sure.
But it kind of feels like we're starting to settle into a groove of smartphones.
Yes.
The time between them, the cycles, they feel polished, they
mm-hmm.
feel intentional, as if things were more mindfully put together.
Right.
Feature-wise, I've got a handful of them written down here.
Yeah.
And they're, I mean, one of the things also here, if you've listened to these episodes of the kind of like the oral history of Android that we're doing, these are not exhaustive lists of everything that was introduced. These are kind of things that we see today, or things that are kind of like benchmarks,
mm-hmm.
watershed moments of things that were introduced into Android, things that maybe up until that point weren't thought about, or you know, a handset maker might have to go about and do themselves. And also, when we talk about, to kind of qualify our discussions on the releases, we're talking about the key versions of Android, because, you know, there are multiple iterations of Ice Cream Sandwich. There was
right.
4.0, 4.1. I mean, there were some incremental or small upgrades along the way, but we'll talk largely about Ice Cream Sandwich as a whole here. On-screen buttons became a big thing.
Yeah.
You know, up until this point, everything seemed to have these physical buttons where you could click and feel and have this tactile kind of experience.
Right.
I don't remember being in love with. I really don't have a strong feeling one way or the other as to whether I welcomed that.
Right.
Today, you know, we've moved even beyond buttons to more like a gesture, but
sure.
I do kind of have a small memory of maybe wanting to hold on to
mm-hmm.
the button,
sure,
the D-pad,
sure.
the physical, but that was maybe because that was the way things had always been up to that point. In terms of UI, you know, you also had swiping gestures to kind of move between recent apps. You could swipe away notifications. The font was changed, which was kind of a nice departure from the Droid Sans
mm-hmm.
font that we had before. This was Roboto. I remember thinking, that's nice and clean. That's
mm-hmm.
nice, and it looks not futuristic or anything, but it looks
right.
very modern.
Yep.
It feels like, okay, when I'm reading an email or doing anything, this kind of feels like this is designed for a smaller screen.
Yeah. If you're looking at a wall of text, it wasn't, there was nothing extra to it.
Yeah.
It was very readable. I remember that was a distinction I recognized.
Mm-hmm.
Other things, and some of these, like we said, are just the major things, or things that came to Android, but things like just the ability to access apps from the lock screen.
Right.
You'd have a notification pop up, and you could go into that app from there.
It would save you, 2 or 3 clicks or
Yeah.
taps, which doesn't seem like a lot. But when you're looking at your lock screen or unlocking your phone, waking it up to see, did that guy message me? 9 times out of 10, I want to go in to see the message,
Right.
not just know that, yes, he replied.
Right.
But what did he say? Can I take action?
Right, and you could go right in it from a click from locking, not have to unlock your phone and then go to your messages and then go to your conversation. It was, those little quality of life things.
Right. Another nice quality of life thing that really kind of take for granted, I think, myself, is the ability to kind of sync Chrome bookmarks.
Yeah.
We don't think anything of it today to kind of pick up where we left off,
Yep.
to see where, history of what I was looking at. If I saved a bookmark in my browser on my computer, I don't have just mobile bookmarks on my phone.
Right.
I have all of the stuff that I've been using at work.
Right.
So it was really nice to kind of be able to just pick up and say, oh man, all my favorites are here. And that was a different world too, where, bookmarks were a big thing.
Yeah.
We didn't have quite the on-demand news and the social media and Reddit and some of those ways of consuming our information, or, our phones now push out content to us on things that we like, things that it knows we want to hear about, things that are kind of shown on our home screen. Where at this time, we were still going through and checking our favorite websites and seeing what was new.
Right.
So I remember the bookmarks was a nice change where it was like, finally.
Right. And this is, we were also starting to see more mobile productivity. So if you are, using your phone for business purposes, a lot of those, if you needed certain websites for business, you didn't have to go, all right, I have these saved. I have to have these both saved in 2 different spots. It was real easy to have, almost the same Chrome experience that you did at your desktop on your phone.
Yeah, we were still some time away from a lot of mobile-friendly or mobile-first designed websites and layout, but it was still nice to just be able to pull up, hey, this is some kind of resource we use on a regular basis, to have that saved. Another feature that I don't think gets thought about often enough is the ability to take a screenshot from your phone. We know that we can do it. It's built right in. It's very obvious and in your face on a lot of apps.
Right.
Or phones, I should say. But this was the first time where they said, okay, we're going to put this in the stock Android experience where you hold down the power and volume button, volume down, at the same time to get a screenshot.
Right.
And that was crazy.
Yeah. It was just that it had a hotkey, so to speak, instead of having to be on Chrome or on something and save a picture or pull up a menu system to save a screenshot. You could just do it from anywhere.
And there were wonky ways that phone makers would go about making their own. We've seen other ones, now do like a 3-finger tap at the screen to do different things. And now we can record our screen in terms of video, if we're playing a game or doing some kind of video chat or anything, we can record that. And that's, this is the start of that. So 10 years ago. Yeah.
And speaking of recording, this was the first that 1080p video recording was stock.
Yeah. The next level of HD.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we talked about 720 being technically HD.
Right.
But to be able to record 1080p, which was where all the TVs were going, and just the general resolution of things, to be able to record a video in true HD. There's a lot of noise around that from different phone makers.
Right. Another feature that was baked into Android that we had seen third-party stuff, but Google said no, we'll develop and make it clean, was Android Beam.
Yep.
Where you could start using the NFC technology for things like bookmark and contact sharing and other things. We could do it peer-to-peer a little bit easier than having to both have the same app and, send from that way.
This is one of those ones that I thought would be much bigger today still.
Sure.
Branding it as Android Beam. And I know Google has done their fair share of rebranding things from, Android Pay to Google Pay,
right.
Google Wallet, and, a lot of changes, but this one didn't stick around.
Yeah.
It isn't like everybody calls it Android Beam.
Right.
It's maybe tap to share, or even if they think about it.
Right.
I mean, you can share just as quickly now with just, open the app, hit share.
Right.
But I thought, okay, this, and it felt like at the time, to me, it was like a way of saying, okay, well, Apple has its own kind of ecosystem and cute names and things that they can do with their devices. This feels like, hey, we have something that we think all other phones will be able to do, and we call it Android Beam.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that was... I used it, and I mean, it maybe as proof of concept to show people.
Yeah.
I think for me, I've kind of just gone back to just share.
Yeah.
The ability to share over Bluetooth, or to share
Right.
to a folder or a link. Photos. That's backed up to Google Photos now.
Well, and the unfortunate thing about Beam is you still had that proximity that you needed to accomplish, where, even through share now, you could Bluetooth or send over network something to somebody, 20 feet away and not have to stand up.
Yeah, over Wi-Fi in your office without having to walk to their desk and say, here, tap me.
Right.
So I can share this with you.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Other thing is you had data usage monitors. So this is, as we were using our phones more and using more and more data, you were starting to see carriers say, hey, that's fine, but this is your allotted amount, and you're gonna have to pay for anything over. And as we started using more and more services on the go, it was...
And this is also at the same time that 4G is starting to build out.
Yes.
We had different companies saying our network will be available or is available in these cities, these markets, and that's starting to be actually, I have much faster data now. I can watch videos. Well, that HD video is chewing up your data.
Right.
So it was really nice to see a control or the ability to control,
right,
if not just monitor what you're using. And I remember, again, my son at that age was using phones, wanting his own. We had Wi-Fi only devices, but when we would start to consider giving him phones, this is one of the tools that we would do is set a limit and show him, hey buddy, all those YouTube videos you're watching, you're going to run out of data.
Right.
You want to get a plan, and we want to put you on a plan with us. You can't do this. You have to be able to do this at home.
Right.
So yeah, and that was also one of the earlier signs of Google kind of understanding that people are doing certain things and what kind of maybe moral obligation to help provide that. We would see that later on with digital well-being and telling you, okay, so not just the data that you're using, but how much time are you spending doing these things. So the data usage was one that, still even today, I think is important.
Absolutely.
Especially if you're a family sharing, so much data, or you have kids that you just don't want to run away with.
Right.
They can at least monitor, and you can teach and encourage that type of stuff.
And then I think it's the last feature we have, and this is one that it seems strange that it was this late in the game, but it was built-in photo editing. Yeah.
There were some really nice apps at the time, or starting to see some good third-party apps to go in and do some editing, but the ability to kind of go in and just do some cropping, or at the same time, if you're doing screenshots, you want to kind of go in and say, I'm going to just kind of crop this image, or I want to draw around it.
Yeah, I want to scratch out maybe this little piece of information. Or
Yep. So that's something that had relied on an app up until that point, is to do some basic photo editing, some brightness, retouching, some, standard things.
Right.
It was nice to see that built into Android. Luke, do you want to talk about a couple phones?
Yeah. Go ahead. What's first on the list?
So I have two phones here of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was announced with Android 4.0, and then another one would arrive a few months later that would also run Ice Cream Sandwich. The first one is the Galaxy Nexus, and this was another collaboration between Google and Samsung.
Right.
We had previously talked about the Galaxy S. So the Galaxy Nexus was a unique experience. It was another stock Android available kind of at launch. I don't have the prices down on either of these, but I do remember this other phone here we'll get to. But the Galaxy Nexus, again, was another one of those, you have to kind of know it exists.
Yeah.
Know what it is. Now, we did start to see it available through carriers, but it was still largely best kept secret, or like spoken of in hushed tones between a certain type of person.
Yeah, right.
This was I liked this device. I thought it was, again, it felt another step forward in terms of polish when you marry good hardware with good software. This had a 4.5-ish, 4.6-inch display.
Yeah.
720 by 1280, so it's HD display.
Yeah.
1 gigabyte of RAM.
Yeah.
Which now we're starting to get into a little bit beefier, as far as like what comes standard. Up until this point, where if you get into a half a gig of RAM, you're doing all right for yourself.
Right.
Storage was 16 and 32 gigabytes.
Okay.
Not too bad.
Nope.
Not expandable at the time. That was something that was interesting, because Samsung was largely known for having expandable, micro SD slots. Rounded out here with 5 megapixel rear camera, 1.3 on the front. This had a 1.2 gigahertz Texas Instruments processor.
Okay.
And this would probably be one of the last major phones that we would see Texas Instruments, if I recall correctly. That name kind of just left.
Right.
They kind of got out of the space.
Yeah.
Battery there were different versions depending on where you got your Galaxy Nexus. 1750 milliamp hours or 1850, depended on whether or not you had the HSPA or the LTE version. And then the CDMA or the Sprint Verizon options, they were a little bit wider.
Yeah.
So they had a little bit bigger battery, 2100 milliamp, which when you think about those, still felt average.
Yeah.
But we've come a pretty decent way from where they would have been not long before.
Right.
The battery industry has always felt as if it didn't move very quickly. But when you look back at it through the lens of, hindsight, it was doing okay. We would always find that Google would bake in some more battery optimizations and smarter way of handling apps and suspending things and putting things to sleep. But, on paper, the needle didn't move very much.
Sure.
So that was the Galaxy Nexus. And then jump forward to, I think, maybe May? I know it was spring, 2012, and the Samsung Galaxy S3.
Yeah.
This was a really big launch for a number of reasons, but I remember this being the one where I was really glad to see Samsung adopt one design for all the carriers. And I know that case makers and accessory makers
appreciated that
really
too.
appreciated that. The S3 was also the first time where they didn't have to or they didn't brand it around it being like a fascinate or vibrant or something where it had like a moniker.
Right.
And it really just kind of set the next few years on each year is going to have its own release.
Right.
Do you remember the S3?
I do remember this phone. It was, at the time, a big phone. Mm-hmm. It was a 4.8-inch screen. It was an HD screen.
And for context, today's phones are routinely around 6 or larger.
Right.
But to get something that was approaching 5.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe a year or so earlier, Sprint had the Evo with a 4.3-inch display, which felt like you were holding this like brick,
right,
wide tablet brick in your hand.
Right.
These were a little bit more narrow, but it was just kind of like, take a look at this thing.
Yeah.
Like, wow, that's a really cool looking phone.
It looked nice. It was sleek.
Yeah. Removable battery. White. I remember a lot of people were really big on getting the white version of a phone because up until, around that time, everything was grays and blacks and
right,
just kind of boring.
Right.
This one was similar in terms of hardware. This had a 1 gigabyte of RAM. In some markets, there was an LTE version that also had 2, which was crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Double the memory. And you pair that with a processor that's 1.4 gigahertz. Again, that moves the needle forward a decent amount.
Right.
So when you have that kind of performance on paper, I remember thinking, and I've said this before, I don't know how you get better than this.
Right.
Look at all these games. I'm just zipping right around, and this thing is just does everything I want it to.
Look how fast this starts up.
Yeah, and how quickly I can get these apps to load and to hop from one to the next.
Yeah.
Storage.
Yeah.
This was something that 16 gigabytes, 32 gigabytes. It felt like we hung out in this area for a long time.
Yeah.
This is kind of when that started.
And I think that was more telling of just the other players in the market. I think it was, if we don't have to give more, we don't need to give more.
Yeah.
If somebody else is doing it, maybe. And it kind of felt like that's where it sat for a little bit.
Yep. And there was a 64 gigabyte version. I mean, if you wanted it, you could pay for it, get that extra space. And a lot of phones of the day still had micro SD card slots. So if you need it, well, we provide you, the ability to add one.
Right.
But that was a thing where it felt like they were moving quicker, and then they just said, we're just going to pause and just kind of sit here, because even some of today's phones, when you look at, these are obviously lower end phones, but 10 years later, phones can still have 16 and 32 gigabytes of storage.
Right.
Now we also rely a lot more on the cloud.
Right.
And at this time, we didn't have Google Photos like we do today.
Exactly.
Which chews up a lot of the local storage on our phone. And music.
Yep.
We were still installing or downloading our music to our device.
Yep.
Streaming was a thing, but it wasn't
not that much.
Super big.
And we were recording HD video then too.
Yeah, this is a good point.
And that just chews up way more.
Yeah.
And
these are just some of the hardware features, but when these companies are talking about the device from user experience, there was a lot of things built into, like the Galaxy S3 was the first to introduce S-Voice and the digital assistant. So there was some other experience features that were, after having covered Android, for 3 or 4 years technically, you realize that there's a lot more to the story than just how these things stack up.
Right.
This is 4.8, this is 4.6.
Yeah.
This has a higher resolution and, faster processor, but a lot of people don't care about that stuff.
No.
And that's where the Galaxy S3, I remember one of the other features at the time was you could I might be conflating the 3 with the 4, but I think it was the 3, where it would stay awake if it recognized you were looking at the phone. And you can scroll with your eyes. By looking down, it would see that if you were reading on a browser, that you know, it would follow and kind of scroll for you naturally. And a lot of these things that would be thrown out in the press announcements and a lot of the noise that they would make was about the experience.
Right.
And that was something that Apple had kind of hit on the head
Sure.
right away. And for Android, it was just like, no, man, this is bigger, faster, more powerful. But when you talk to people, they don't care about that.
Yeah.
What can I do with it?
Yeah.
You know, so that's where with 4.0, it's like, well, you can do your photo editing right from your phone now without an app. It makes sense. It's in a place where you would look for it. It looks better. So I think this is kind of the time where things begin to get a little more deliberate and slowed as well, where we get to almost the annual release.
Yeah.
So it feels like Android isn't kind of like chasing itself down,
Right.
trying to patch and add and kind of introduce things. Luke, do you have anything else that you wanted to say or talk about for Ice Cream Sandwich or devices?
No, it was I think the best thing for it when it came out, it was for people looking at Android and seeing it, it was a very distinct, okay, they're attempting to address this fragmentation issue that we've been talking about for a year or so. And they are now, everything's starting to look similar. And they have a roadmap, and it was a lot of the a little bit of a we hear you and we're working on it. So it was cool. It was cool because up until that point it was just okay. They're implementing these features and features and features, and now it's we have the features for you, and we're going to keep implementing and innovating on features, but we're going to make sure that the experience matches the features.
Yep. Yeah, and that was an early knock on Android was, I don't know where to go for this stuff. I don't know how to use this.
Right.
You keep telling me my phone's better, but I don't feel like that.
Right.
You know, and slowing things down and having shuffled around the way they look and feel, things felt more overt. They felt, again, I think the word is intentional. You know, when you look at the experience and think, oh, this makes sense. I want to tap on this notification and go into resume the conversation.
Right.
Instead of just waking my phone up and checking over and over.
Right.
Or to go into the weather widget, you know, and see what's going on if I get a notification pushed to me. This makes sense to me, but it wasn't really any smarter.
No.
It was just kind of presented in a way that felt more mindful for the user.
Right.
That's going to do it for me.
Yeah.
All right. So this was Android 4.0 Ice Cream Sandwich. The next major release we will get into is 5.
Yeah.
Nope. Actually, there is one that we have to get into prior to that, 4.4.
Oh, right.
KitKat.
KitKat.
5 will come later with the big material design stuff.
Yeah.
But we did have KitKat, which was an interesting experience and an interesting release and kind of a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
You know,
and it was a little confusing because the naming convention and the timing kind of threw everybody off.
Yeah, so that will be the next episode. That's going to do it for me. Thanks for listening. This is Scott and Luke.
Yep.
Guys, have a great day.
See ya.